The silence after Zathara's words stretched heavy across the field. Soldiers stood uncertain, their weapons raised but trembling. The warlord scowled, his jaw tight beneath his helmet. He had expected fear, surrender, or rage, but not this. Not a queen choosing honesty over power. "You are a fool," the warlord barked. "Without fear you are nothing. Without strength, they will devour you. Your throne will crumble, and all will remember you as the queen who abandoned her own kind." His words were sharp, but they did not break her. Zathara stood tall, golden eyes glowing against the night. For once she did not speak as a ruler, but as herself. "I was told no one could ever love me," she said, her voice low but carrying. "I believed it for centuries. I wore that belief like armor. I used it to hide, to lash out, to build an empire of walls so high no one could reach me, but this human..." She turned, her gaze falling on Ethan. This human shattered that lie. Ethan's breath caught. He had never heard her bare her heart so openly, and in that moment, he knew it was his turn. He stepped forward, standing beside her, even though he was dwarfed by the towering figures around him. His voice, though small compared to the warlord's booming tone, carried with quiet strength. "You think love is weakness," Ethan said, "but it's the strongest thing we have. Fear makes people obey for a while, but love makes them stand even when everything is against them. That's what you don't understand. That's what she's learning, and that's why she'll win." "The..." Warlord spat. "You dare lecture warriors with your soft human words?" Ethan's gaze hardened. "Words are stronger than you think. Words can end wars before they start. And here's mine. I love her." The queen stiffened. The words rang louder than any battle cry, not because of volume, but because of their truth. Her golden eyes widened, her chest rising sharply. For centuries she had been called many things: monster, conqueror, tyrant, but never this. Never loved. The warlord laughed, a harsh sound. "Love? Between a human and our queen? Ridiculous." But his mockery faltered when he saw the soldiers' faces. They were not laughing. They were staring at their queen, stunned, shaken, as if they were seeing her for the first time. Zathara's hands trembled. Her heart, so long armored, now cracked open. She turned to Ethan, her voice barely a whisper. "You mean this?" Ethan met her gaze without flinching. "Every word. You're not a monster. You're not unlovable. You're someone who deserves more than fear, and I'll stand by you no matter what." For a long moment, there was only silence. Then Zathara slowly turned back to her soldiers. Her posture shifted, no longer just regal but alive, filled with a strength born not of fear but of conviction. "You have followed me because you feared me," she said. "But tonight, I ask you to follow me for another reason. Follow me because I will no longer rule to keep you trembling. I will rule to keep you standing. If you cannot accept that, then strike me down now. But if you can, then rise with me, not as subjects, but as my people." The soldiers shifted uneasily. Some lowered their weapons. Some looked at one another uncertain. The warlord barked commands, but fewer obeyed. "You see?" Ethan whispered to her. "They don't want fear anymore, they want something else. And you're giving it to them." The warlord growled. "Enough of this weakness." He raised his blade and charged. Before Ethan could move, Zathara stepped forward, her claws flashing. She met the warlord's strike with a force that shook the ground. Their clash echoed through the night, steel against steel, strength against strength. But this time, Zathara did not fight for power. She fought for truth. The battle was brutal, each blow shaking the air. Sparks flew, dust rose, and soldiers watched, breathless. The warlord swung with raw fury, but Zathara's movements were precise, controlled, fueled by something greater than rage. At last, with a final strike, she sent him crashing to the ground. His blade shattered, his body broken. She stood over him, chest heaving, claws poised for the killing blow. The warlord sneered up at her. "Do it. Prove you are still the Queen of Fear." Zathara's claws hovered. For centuries, she would have ended him without hesitation. But tonight, she looked down and saw not an enemy to destroy but a chance to show something new. Slowly, she withdrew her hand. "No," she said. "I am no longer your queen of fear." The warlord's eyes widened in shock. He collapsed, defeated not by death, but by mercy. The soldiers erupted in murmurs. Some fell to their knees, not in fear but in respect. Others dropped their weapons altogether, tears glinting in their eyes. For the first time, they saw a ruler who had chosen restraint over blood. Ethan stepped forward, his chest swelling with pride. "You did it." Scythera turned to him, her golden eyes shining, not with fire but with something softer, warmer. She moved closer, towering over him yet somehow looking vulnerable. "You spoke words I never thought I would hear," she whispered. "You gave me something I never thought I would have." Ethan smiled. "And you gave me something too. You showed me courage, not the kind that fights wars but the kind that dares to change." Her throat tightened. "And if I fail again?" He reached for her hand, resting his smaller fingers against her clawed palm. "Then I'll be here, because love doesn't walk away when things get hard." For a moment, she could not speak. Centuries of walls of iron and fire crumbled in that simple touch. She lowered her head, close enough for him to see the flicker of vulnerability in her golden eyes. "You are a strange human," she said softly. "And you're a stubborn queen," Ethan replied with a grin. For the first time she laughed, a sound deep and warm, shaking loose the last chains of her old life. The soldiers looked on, not at a tyrant but at a leader who could laugh, who could care, who could change. In the days that followed, the dominion began to shift. The council fell, their power broken. Some resisted, but the tide had turned. Scythera did not rebuild her throne in blood. Instead, she stood before her people and spoke words no ruler had ever dared before. "I will no longer rule alone. The time of fear is over. Together we will build something greater." Some doubted, some resisted, but many listened. For the first time, they saw a path that was not forged in chains, and at her side, always, was Ethan. Together, they walked through cities once drowned in silence, now filled with cautious voices of hope. Together they rebuilt not an empire of fear, but the beginnings of a world where power was balanced with compassion. And in quiet moments, away from councils and soldiers, Ethan would remind her again and again with a smile, "You are loved." Every time, her heart ached and healed a little more. The queen who once believed no one could ever love her now carried within her the greatest truth of all. She was not alone, and neither was her people. Ethan's life in the Zerath palace began not as a prisoner locked away in chains, but as something far stranger. He was allowed to walk within certain halls, always under the eyes of silent guards with armor that gleamed like obsidian. He ate meals not unlike his own rations, though far more elaborate, and every few days he was summoned before the queen. He never knew if it was to test him, to mock him, or to draw something out of him, but he went each time without resistance. The throne room always felt the same, vast, echoing, heavy with power. Yet the queen herself no longer seemed as distant as the first day. She asked him questions. At first they were simple, practical things. How humans organized armies, how they made decisions, how they survived against stronger enemies. But slowly, her questions shifted. "Tell me of your world," she commanded one evening, her voice carrying through the hall. "Not your weapons, not your wars. Tell me what your people love." Ethan tilted his head, surprised. "What we love?" "Yes," she said. Her golden eyes locked on him. "You speak of this love as though it is power. Show me this power." So Ethan spoke. He told her of Earth's oceans, of families gathering around fires, of festivals in city streets. He told her about songs sung by voices that carried hope even in the darkest winters. He spoke of how humans built homes together, raised children together, and chose to stand beside one another even when the universe was cruel. The queen listened in silence, her claws tapping lightly against her throne. For a moment, Ethan wondered if she mocked him, if she would laugh and call it weakness. But when she finally spoke, her voice was softer. "Your people cling to one another as if the stars themselves are not enough," she said. "Strange. My kind were taught long ago that only power endures, bonds fade, trust shatters, love." She paused as if the word itself were strange on her tongue. "Love is an illusion. It cannot keep empires alive." "Maybe not," Ethan admitted. "But it keeps people alive. Sometimes that's enough." Her eyes narrowed. "And yet you humans die so quickly. Does this love shield you from that?" "No," Ethan said simply. "But it gives us a reason to face it." The queen fell silent again, but he noticed something in her gaze, a flicker of thought, of doubt. It was the first time he realized that perhaps she was not as unshakable as her empire believed. Days passed. Each time he met her, their conversations grew longer. He told her about laughter, about sacrifice, about how humans sometimes chose weakness in order to protect someone else. She listened, asked sharp questions, and though she tried to keep her tone cold, Ethan could sense her curiosity burning brighter each time. Yet not everyone welcomed this strange exchange. The council of Zerath warlords who served beneath the queen grew restless. They saw the human not as an interesting curiosity but as a danger. Whispers filled the palace corridors, whispers that the queen was softening, that she wasted her time on a fragile creature who should have been crushed. One evening, as Ethan was escorted back to his chamber, he caught sight of two warlords standing in a shadowed alcove. Their voices were low, but he caught enough. "She lingers too long with the human," one growled. "He poisons her mind." "If she falters, the Dominion falters," the other replied. "Perhaps the time has come to remind her of her duty." The guards pushed Ethan forward before he could hear more, but the words lingered in his mind. The queen was in danger, not from her enemies, but from her own people. The next day, when he was brought before her again, he could not hold his tongue. "They're plotting against you," he said bluntly. Her eyes narrowed. "Who?" "Your council," Ethan said. "They think I'm changing you. They don't like it. They want you to stay the ruler they fear, not the one who listens." Her expression did not shift, but he saw her claws tighten against the armrest of her throne. "They forget their place," she said coldly, but then her eyes softened just slightly. "And you, human, why warn me? You could use this to escape, to let them tear me down." "Because I don't want to see you destroyed," Ethan said. His voice was steady, without hesitation. Something flickered across her face again, something almost fragile. She looked away, as if the weight of his words unsettled her. "You are strange," she murmured. "A prisoner who guards his captor, a soldier who speaks like a poet." "I'm just a man," Ethan said. "And maybe that's the point. You're used to people who only fear you. But fear doesn't last. Sooner or later it turns into hate. You can't build forever on that." The queen fell silent, her gaze distant. For a long moment, the only sound in the throne room was the hum of alien lights. Finally, she rose from her throne and descended the steps until she stood before him. Up close, she towered over him, her presence overwhelming, yet there was no threat in her stance. "Then show me," she said at last. "Show me what I cannot see from this throne." Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" "You claim my people." "Obey out of fear, not loyalty," she said. "Very well, we shall see. Tomorrow you will walk with me beyond these walls. I will wear no crown and you will speak your truth. If your words are lies, I will know. If they are not—" She hesitated, as if admitting the possibility pained her. "Then perhaps I have been blind for too long." Ethan nodded. "I'll go." The next day, disguised in cloaks that hid her regal form, the queen walked beside Ethan through the streets of her capital. The city was vast, its towers piercing the clouds, its markets filled with beings from conquered worlds. The people, bowed as soldiers passed, but their eyes were cold. Mothers pulled their children close. Merchants smiled with trembling lips, and conversations died when patrols walked by. Ethan did not speak at first. He let her see it for herself, the fear in their eyes, the silence that followed her guards. Only when they stood in a crowded square did he finally turn to her. "You see it now, don't you?" he said quietly. "They follow you because they must. But look at them. Not one smiles when your soldiers march by. Not one looks at you with pride. Only fear." The queen said nothing. Her golden eyes swept the crowd, and for the first time, Ethan thought he saw pain in them, real pain. "They obey you," he continued. "But they don't follow you. That's the difference." Her hands clenched at her sides, the claws scraping faintly against the fabric of her cloak. Sci-Fi was taught that fear is loyalty, that terror binds tighter than trust. She shook her head slowly. "Perhaps I was taught lies." At that moment, a group of masked figures emerged from the crowd, moving swiftly. Assassins. Ethan reacted before he thought, shoving the queen aside as a blade flashed. He fought clumsily, unarmed, but he blocked one strike with his arm and managed to trip another attacker. The queen's disguise fell, her towering form revealed, and with a roar she struck down the assassins with a fury that shook the square. When it was over, Ethan lay on the ground, his arm bleeding but still alive. The queen knelt beside him, her claws trembling as they hovered over his wound. Her voice shook, not with anger, but with something else. "You protected me," she whispered. "Not my crown, not my throne, me." Ethan managed a weak smile. "Of course I did." For a long moment her gaze locked on his, her golden eyes filled with something raw and unguarded. In that instant, Queen Zithara of the Zerath Dominion felt something she had not felt in centuries, something she had once believed impossible, and it terrified her more than any assassin's blade. The night after the attack, the palace was restless. Guards doubled their patrols, the council whispered in secret chambers, and rumors spread through the city that someone had tried to kill their queen. But what none of them knew was how much. The event had shaken Zithara herself. She had faced assassins before, countless times over her reign, yet this was different. What lingered in her thoughts was not the danger, but the human who had stood between her and the blades. Ethan sat in his chamber with his arm wrapped in alien cloth, the wound healing slowly. He had refused the strange medical machines they offered, preferring a simple bandage. He didn't want to feel like he owed them more than he already did. But when the door opened and the queen herself entered, he knew this night would not be ordinary. She stepped inside without guards, her tall figure casting a shadow across the room. For once she did not wear her crown or armor, only a dark robe that shimmered faintly in the light. Ethan rose to his feet, surprised. "You should rest," he said. "You nearly got yourself killed today." Her golden eyes locked onto him. "And you nearly died because of me." "That's part of the job," Ethan said with a half smile. "Soldier's instinct. See danger, move." She moved closer, her gaze fierce. "You are no longer a soldier. You are my prisoner. You had no duty to protect me." "I didn't do it because of duty," Ethan said softly. Those words silenced her. She stood only a few feet away, her claws curled slightly, as if she wasn't sure whether to draw back or step closer. Her voice, when it came, was quieter than he had ever heard it. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you risk your life for me?" Ethan met her gaze without fear. "Because you're more than your crown. Because for the first time I saw you as someone who wanted to be more than a ruler everyone fears. You don't want to admit it, but I think it's true. And if that's who you are, then you're worth saving." Her eyes widened slightly, and her chest rose with a slow breath, as if she had forgotten how to breathe. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she turned away, her robe sweeping against the floor. "You speak as if you know me," she said, her tone sharp again, but not cold. "But you know nothing of what it means to rule. You know nothing of the weight I carry." "Then tell me," Ethan said. She froze at the door. For a long time she stood in silence, her back to him. Finally, she said, "Tomorrow, you will hear truths no outsider has ever heard, if you are bold enough to face them." And she left him alone in the quiet room with more questions than answers. The next day, she summoned him not to the throne room but to a chamber deep beneath the palace. The walls here were carved with ancient symbols glowing faintly in the dark. In the center stood a wide window that opened to a cavern where streams of molten light flowed like rivers. "This is the heart of my empire," she said as he entered. "Here, generations of my ancestors swore to keep power at any cost. It is said the stones themselves carry our oaths." She turned toward him, her eyes gleaming in the dim light. "Do you know what it takes to rule an empire of 1,000 worlds, human?" Ethan shook his head. "Fear," she said. "Always fear. My people respect strength. They do not follow kindness. To show weakness is to invite betrayal. That is the truth of the Zirath Dominion." Ethan stepped closer to the window, watching the glowing streams below. "And yet your own council plotted against you," he said. "If fear is so strong, why do they still want you gone?" Her claws dug lightly into the stone railing. "Because they fear me, but they do not trust me. And perhaps they are right. Even I no longer know who I am when I look in the mirror." She turned her gaze toward him. "You, human, you speak of bonds and love as though they are stronger than fear. But how can I trust such things when all I have seen is betrayal?" Ethan thought for a moment, then said, "Because trust is a choice. Fear takes nothing from you but trust. Trust requires giving something away. It's harder, but it's real." Her eyes narrowed. "And you would ask me to trust? You, a prisoner, a soldier of my enemies." "I'd ask you to try," Ethan said simply. For a moment she studied him with a gaze so sharp he thought it might cut through him. Then she turned away again, her voice low. "If I were anyone else, perhaps I would believe you. But I am the queen, and no one could ever love me." The words carried the same weight as before, but this time they trembled with uncertainty. Ethan stepped forward, standing beside her at the railing. "Then maybe it's not about being queen," he said quietly. "Maybe it's about being you." She looked at him then, and for the first time, her golden eyes softened in a way that stripped away the mask of power. In that moment, Ethan saw not the ruler of an empire, but a woman who had carried loneliness for so long she no longer knew who she was without it. Before she could respond, the chamber doors burst open. A warlord entered, his armor gleaming, his voice sharp. "My queen, forgive the intrusion, but this cannot continue. The council demands the human's execution. He has infected your mind with weakness." Zithara's expression snapped back into the mask of a ruler, her eyes blazing with authority. "You dare make demands of me in my own hall?" The warlord did not flinch. "I dare because the Dominion will not survive if you falter. Choose, my queen, him or us." The silence that followed was sharp as a blade. Ethan stood still, his pulse quickening, but he said nothing. He knew this was her choice, not his. Finally, Zithara spoke, her voice cold as iron. "Leave us. I will decide." The warlord hesitated, then bowed stiffly and stormed out, his footsteps echoing in the chamber. When they were alone again, the queen turned back to Ethan. For the first time, he saw real conflict in her eyes. Not the conflict of war, but of the heart. "They will not stop," she said. "If I protect you, they will turn against me. If I let them kill you, then perhaps I lose the only voice that has spoken to me honestly in centuries." "Then you already know your answer," Ethan said softly. Her claws tightened on the railing. "Do not presume to know my mind." "I don't," Ethan said. "But I know this. You're standing at a choice. You can rule through fear like you always have, or you can risk something greater. Trust, hope, maybe even love. But you can't have both. You have to choose." Her chest rose and fell with a deep, trembling breath. She looked at him, And in that gaze was not the might of a queen, but the vulnerability of someone standing at the edge of a cliff, afraid to fall. For the first time, she did not answer. Instead, she turned back to the glowing cavern and let the silence stretch between them, heavy and uncertain. And Ethan knew that whatever choice she made next would decide not only his fate, but the fate of her entire empire. The days that followed were tense, each one more dangerous than the last. Whispers spread through the palace like a poison. Guards who once stood proudly at their posts now shifted uneasily when the queen passed. The council met in secret, their voices rising behind closed doors. And Ethan felt it in every glance, every shadow. The storm was coming. One night, as he sat alone in his chamber, the door opened without warning. It was not a guard. It was the queen herself. She entered quickly, her cloak drawn tightly around her tall frame, her golden eyes sharp with urgency. "You must come with me," she said. Ethan rose at once. "What's happening?" "They move tonight," she said. "The council has chosen rebellion. If we stay, they will kill us both." Ethan blinked. "Us? You're their queen." Her voice hardened. "I am their obstacle. They will replace me with another who clings to their old ways. They see me as weak because of you." She paused, her eyes locking onto his. "Because," I began to listen. Ethan's chest tightened. He knew what this meant. "Then let's not let them win." Without another word, she turned and led him through hidden passages beneath the palace. The tunnels were carved from stone that glowed faintly, ancient and untouched by the grandeur above. Their footsteps echoed as they hurried, the air thick with the weight of history. "They will hunt us," Ethan said as they moved. "Yes," she answered. "But they do not know these paths. Only the rulers of the Dominion walk here. It was meant as a place of retreat in times of siege. Tonight, it is our only chance." For hours they walked until at last the tunnel opened into the outer edges of the city. The capital loomed in the distance, its towers lit with burning fires where once there had been calm lights. The rebellion had begun. Shithara stood on a ridge, her cloak billowing, her gaze fixed on the city she had ruled for centuries. For the first time, Ethan saw sorrow etched deep into her expression. "I built an empire of fear," she said quietly. "And now fear has turned against me. This is my doing." Ethan stepped beside her. "No, this is their choice, but you can choose differently now." Her golden eyes turned to him, searching his face. For a moment he thought she might speak, but then shouts echoed in the distance. Armored figures were approaching. "They've found us," she said. Together they fled into the lower districts of the city where ordinary citizens lived. Here the streets were narrow and filled with shadows. The people looked out from their doorways, frightened, whispering as their queen passed by. Some bowed in confusion, others shrank back. None moved to betray her, but none rushed to help either. At last they ducked into an abandoned structure. The queen leaned against the wall, her breathing steady though her eyes burned with fire. Ethan sat across from her, his body weary. "This isn't the end," Ethan said. "It doesn't have to. You can fight back," her voice was low. "Fight with what? The armies will follow the council. The people fear me. I am one queen against 1,000 worlds." "Not if they see you differently," Ethan said. "Not if they see the truth." Her claws scraped lightly against the stone. "The truth? That you're not untouchable," Ethan said. "That you care. That you're willing to risk yourself for them, not just rule over them. They need to see not the Queen of Fear, but Zathira, the one who wants more than to be alone." For a long moment she stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then she lowered her head slightly, her voice softer than he had ever heard. "And if they reject me?" she asked. "Then you'll know you tried," Ethan said. "And you won't be alone in it." Her eyes lifted to him again, and something stirred there. A flicker of trust, fragile but real. Before she could respond, the sound of boots thundered outside. The rebels were closing in. Zathira's claws flexed, her body tense, but Ethan touched, Her arm. "Not here," he whispered. "We have to move." They slipped out the back, weaving through alleys and markets. At one point, a group of citizens spotted them. Ethan braced for betrayal, but instead a woman pulled her child close and silently pointed them toward a safe street. It was a small gesture, but it carried weight. Perhaps not everyone wanted the council's rule. At last they reached the edge of the city, where the industrial districts gave way to open fields. Fires burned behind them, the sound of battle echoing. The queen stopped and looked back, her expression torn. "All my life, I have been the voice of power," she said, "and now I run like a fugitive." Ethan placed a hand on her arm. "Sometimes, running is the first step to fighting back." Her gaze lingered on him, then she nodded. For days they hid, moving from place to place, always one step ahead of the council's hunters. And in those days, something began to shift between them. They spoke not as ruler and prisoner, but as two people bound by survival. She told him of her childhood, raised in palaces of stone and fire where every lesson was about strength and every mistake was punished with cruelty. She told him how her mother, the queen before her, had spoken only of conquest and fear, never of tenderness. Ethan listened, his heart heavy, realizing how much of her life had been built without choice. In return, he told her of Earth, not of its wars but of its quiet places. He spoke of fields of green where children laughed, of oceans where waves crashed against rocks, of nights under stars where people held one another close. She listened with a hunger in her eyes, as if drinking in something she had been denied all her life. One evening, as they sat by the faint glow of alien fire, she turned to him. Her golden eyes were softer now, no longer sharp with command. "You are different from any warrior I have ever known," she said. "You fight with words, with hope. It is unsettling." Ethan smiled faintly. "It's what humans do. We survive by finding meaning, even in the darkest places." She studied him in silence, then lowered her gaze. "I do not know if I can be what you believe I am. I do not know if I can lead without fear." "You don't have to be perfect," Ethan said. "You just have to try." Her claws flexed lightly in the dirt. "And if I fail?" "Then you fail trying to build something better," Ethan said. "And that's still worth more than ruling through fear forever." For a long moment she looked at him, and Ethan saw the walls around her heart tremble. In her gaze he saw a woman torn between centuries of teaching and the fragile hope of something new. But before anything more could be said, the sound of marching reached them. Dozens of soldiers surrounded their hiding place, weapons drawn. At their head stood one of the warlords, his armor glinting in the firelight. "It is over, my queen," the warlord declared. "Come with us, and perhaps we will grant you mercy. Stay with the human, and you will die as a traitor to your throne." The queen rose slowly, towering above Ethan, her cloak sweeping the ground. Her golden eyes burned as she looked at the warlord, then at the soldiers, then finally back at Ethan. In that moment, Ethan knew. This was her choice. Fear or trust, power or something far greater. And when she spoke, her voice carried not just across the field, but into the hearts of everyone present. "You call me weak," she said, her voice ringing like steel. "You call me unfit because I dared to listen. But hear me now. I will no longer rule through fear. If I must lose my throne to keep my soul, then so be it," the warlord sneered. "Then you choose the human." Cythera's gaze flicked to Ethan, and for the first time in her life she smiled. Not the smile of a queen, but of a woman who had chosen her path. "I choose truth," she said. The soldiers hesitated, their weapons trembling. For the first time, they saw their queen not as a distant ruler, but as someone who stood unafraid before them, willing to risk everything. And in that hesitation, the fate of the empire began to shift. The war between humans and the Zirath Dominion had dragged on for years, longer than anyone expected. Humanity had entered the conflict as the underdogs, fighting a species that was older, larger, and far more advanced. Many believed Earth would be crushed within months. But humans had a strange way of surviving, adapting, and pushing forward no matter the odds. That stubborn spirit had carried them through battles that should have been impossible. though the cost was heavy. Ethan Ward, once a soldier and now a reluctant diplomat, had seen too much of it. He had lost friends, comrades, and pieces of himself along the way. It was on the broken surface of a captured colony world that his life changed. His unit had been sent to defend a civilian outpost, but the Dominion's armies struck harder and faster than anyone predicted. His soldiers fought bravely, but the lines broke, and Ethan was left behind in the chaos. He had expected death, but instead he was seized by armored warriors and dragged before the one who commanded them all, the alien queen. Her throne room was nothing like the halls of human leaders. It was vast, carved from black stone that pulsed, faintly as if alive, lined with towering spires that shimmered with alien light. The air was heavy, almost pressing down on him, carrying the scent of strange oils and burning metal. At the center, seated upon a throne shaped like a crown of blades, was the figure who ruled over countless star systems. Queen Zithera, the Empress of the Zerath Dominion. She was enormous compared to him, her form both terrifying and strangely graceful. Her body shimmered with scales that shifted in shades of deep violet and silver. Her eyes, slitted like a predator's, glowed faintly as they studied him. Her voice, when she spoke, rumbled through the chamber deeper than any human's, yet sharp with intelligence. "So this is the human who would stand against me," she said. "So small, so fragile, and yet still alive when so many others are not." Ethan's knees wanted to buckle under the weight of her gaze, but he refused to kneel. His heart pounded in his chest, but he forced his voice to remain steady. "Fragile doesn't mean weak," he replied. The guards bristled at his tone, but the queen raised a single clawed hand, silencing them. She leaned forward, her expression unreadable. "Interesting. Most prisoners beg for mercy. You defy me. Why?" "Because begging won't change anything," Ethan said. "If you're going to kill me, you'll do it whether I bow or not. If you want me alive, you already have a reason." The queen studied him for a long moment. Then a faint smile curled across her sharp features. "You are bold, foolish perhaps, but bold." She leaned back, resting her clawed hand against the throne. "Tell me, human, what do you believe you see before you? A monster? A tyrant? A queen?" Ethan hesitated, unsure if this was a trap, but he answered honestly. "I see someone who carries the weight of an empire on her shoulders." For the first time, her expression shifted into something more complicated than intimidation. A flicker of surprise, maybe even pain, passed through her eyes. She chuckled softly, though it was a sound filled with bitterness. "Weight, yes, a crushing weight. You see much, little human. Yet there is one thing you do not see. No one could ever love me." The words hung in the chamber, heavy and strange. Ethan blinked at her, thrown off balance by the sudden vulnerability in her voice. She said it not as a boast, but as a confession. There was no mockery, no arrogance, only a quiet certainty that pierced deeper than any threat. Ethan could have stayed silent. He could have let the moment pass. But something inside him refused. Perhaps it was exhaustion from years of war, or perhaps it was the human tendency to reach out, even when logic said not to. "You're wrong," he said softly. The queen's eyes widened, and for once she seemed caught off guard. Her lips parted slightly, as if she had not expected anyone to challenge that statement. "Wrong?" she repeated, her voice low. "Do you dare claim you could love what I am?" Ethan shook his head. "I don't know what I could feel, but I know this. You've already decided no one can love you, and that's not the truth. It's just what you've been forced to believe. I don't see a monster. I see someone who thinks they have to be alone forever, and maybe that doesn't have to be true." The chamber fell silent. Even the guards seemed uncertain, shifting in place but not daring to speak. The queen's claws flexed against her throne as if she were struggling with something. Her eyes searched his face as if trying to find the lie in his words, but she found none. Humans had a strange way of speaking from the heart, raw and unpolished, and she had not been prepared for it. Finally, she leaned back, her expression unreadable again. But there was a flicker in her eyes that had not been there before. A faint spark of something Ethan could not name. "You are either the bravest fool I have ever met," she said, "or the most dangerous." "Maybe both," Ethan replied, his voice steady. The Queen laughed then, a sound that echoed through the chamber. It was not cruel laughter, nor mocking. It was something else, almost genuine. For a brief moment, she looked less like a ruler, carved from stone, and more like someone who had forgotten how to laugh. "You intrigue me, human," she said finally. "Perhaps I will not kill you, not yet. I wish to see what more you will say when pressed." And with that, Ethan Ward's fate was sealed. He was not executed. He was not cast into the dungeons. Instead, he was kept in the palace, close to the Queen herself. What began as a strange curiosity would grow into something that neither he nor she could have imagined, something that would shake the foundation of an empire built on fear. But in that first meeting, in those first words, a seed had been planted. For the first time in centuries, the alien queen had heard something she had long stopped believing. That maybe, just maybe, she was not beyond love. And for the first time, Ethan Ward wondered if the war he had been fighting all these years might not be won by weapons, but by words.